Shabbat shalom. Think for a moment. How long do you think it takes the average person to discern or judge whether something is desirable or not? A cinesecond? Oh, I was like, I don't know what a cinesecond is, but that sounds about right. In any number of ways. I appreciate the punniness of that comment. Well, you might be interested to know that this sort of field of research has evolved significantly over the last decade. Up until about 2008, the thinking was it was anywhere between 1 to 10 seconds that it took for a person to really make a judgment. But a study in 2012 by Google, partnered with the University of Basel, tracked it to somewhere between 1/20th and 1/50th of a second. Maybe that's a cinesecond, I don't know. So it's really fast that we make our decisions, faster than that snap. We humans are genetically hardwired to make snap decisions because it's part of our nature to want things simple and clear. Perhaps better stated, it's the evolution of our brains that makes it human nature to want things simple and clear. This phenomenon developed originally, as you might imagine, as a part of our fight or flight response to save us from predators in the wild. You know, you don't have that much time to decide whether the salivating, crouching tiger behind you is friendly or not. Truly, or so I hear. But it's remained this key feature in our human discernment and judgment process, not just in fight or flight scenarios, but really in every scenario, shaping one of our most important and dominant thought processes. What Nobel Prize-winning psychologist and economist Daniel Kahneman named, "What you see is all there is," bias. This idea that when our minds make decisions, their default setting is to deal only in known knowns and largely ignore facts that might make a decision more complex. Our minds like to keep things simple and clear because this allows them to take whatever conclusions have been made and use those as building blocks for whatever larger narratives or judgments need to be made in a quick and efficient way. Of note is that when we encounter something that does not quickly conform to our expectations of what something should be, the pace of our discernment slows down, thereby making it harder for our brains to decode. Put simply, our brains don't like that sort of situation. And if we don't step in to intervene consciously, allowing for the complexity of any given situation, our brains will default judge the matter as not simple enough and fix the judgment to either fully positive or fully negative so it can continue along its merry little way. The problem, of course, in this thinking is that it means we, humans, tend not to look for what we do not readily see. We get a few elements of the story, and from that, we construct a complete story with all the pieces we have, when all too often the elements we are getting are, at best, incomplete, but nearly always biased in some direction. And this opens the door to other phenomena like confirmation bias, filter bubbles. It's why social media is so addictive. Interestingly, the "what you see is all there is" bias also proves the dominant cause for one of, if not the most widely known episode of collective moral failure in Torah. Do you know what that episode is? I'll give you a hint. Moo. Yeah. This week's Torah portion of Kol Ki Tisa features this story of the golden calf. What you might not know, though, is that when our ancestors constructed the golden calf, they were not actually building an image of some other ancient Near Eastern bovine divinity. They were instead making an image of what they felt they needed our God, Yud He Vav He Adonai, whatever you want to call it, to look like. From the time they left Egypt, the ancient Israelites visually saw the presence of God at all times, whether in the form of a cloud or the form of fire, and this guided them wherever they went. Moses ascended Mount Sinai for 40 days to receive the law, and when that happened, all the visual connection they had had with God, it disappeared. Their complete dependence on the necessity of seeing God, this led them to grow insecure. And to satiate their perceived need for seeing God, they built a visible image of God in an attempt to sum up all that God was in one finite articulation. After all, there's nothing really that offensive about a gold cow. What's sinful is that their construction and worship of it messaged that God could be summed up in one singular image. They made the part come to be the whole. They fell for the what you see is all there is phenomena. And here's where things get interesting. This, believing that what you see is all there is actually the definition of idolatry. Not the commonly held understanding that idolatry means giving our allegiance to another god, but instead that idolatry is best understood as the error of mistaking the part for the whole, of granting absolute value to something of only relative value. Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory teaches this: the objects of idolatrous adorations were not in themselves evil. Stars, moon, trees, sun, even a cow, well, these are not unholy in and of themselves. It's the worship of portions of creation as if they were the whole of creation that eclipses the unity of God's world and profanes it. This idea is developed more fully in an entire tractate of the Talmud dedicated to the subject of idolatry called Avodah Zarah, in which example after example is offered of our ancestors noting the majesty of the sun, moon, and stars, and seeking to honor God's creation, but actually bowing and praying to these celestial beings themselves. It's not that they didn't believe in God. They simply became confused between the part and the whole. And so we might ask, what's so wrong with that? Admiring the things that God has created? And the answer is this: it's a matter of faith to pray, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, for creating the sun, moon, and stars." But it is idolatry to pray, "Blessed are you, sun, moon, and stars, for being created." But lest we think that such idolatrous practices are limited only to how people perceive God, Rabbi Schulweis pushes this idea and suggests something that to me seems pretty revolutionary. He writes, when institutions or ideologies arrogate to themselves exclusive truth and dismiss all others as aberrations, the plenitude and grandeur of Judaism itself is impoverished. If you think about it in its grandest sense, idolatry is ultimately about assigning absolute value to otherwise good goals and ideas. And that's problematic because it results in highly exaggerated or imbalanced priorities. It turns our ideals instead into idols, our goals into gods. And that's a real problem, not just in particular for Jews and Jewish communities, but rather that's a problem that sits at the very heart of the vast divides that plague so much of society today. My teacher and friend, Rabbi David Stern, offers a poignant example. Devotion to a cause shows an admirable level of commitment and selflessness. But when the commitment to the cause is carried out at any cost, when a person's passion becomes fanaticism, leading them to devalue the lives and dignity of others, then the once admirable commitment has become an act of idolatry. When the part is a means to arrive at the whole, we will likely find our needs met, find ourselves fulfilled as we journey along our path. But when the part is made into the whole itself, we will likely find ourselves experiencing just the opposite, feeling empty, our needs unmet, trapped in self-absorption, obscuring our perspective on what's really there and important. If you think about it, it's pretty ironic. In a perspective that's supposed to be the most expansive, as it assumes that everything is seen, as is the case in the what you see is all there is bias, ultimately, a person's reality and perspective become notably small and limited. Here's something that I think is pretty cool. In the ancient Near East, the word used for statues or idols, in Akkadian, it was tsalmu. In Assyrian, it was tsalam ili. Interestingly, though Judaism is very clear about the sin of idolatry, Judaism was the first to articulate the notions that we humans are created b'tselem, in the image of God, Elohim. What's the closest thing in Judaism we have to the image of God? Not a statue, not a sculpture. It's us, people, in all their variety, in all of our complexity, charged from on high to make this known part of the creation that we call life holy and healed. God's hands here on earth. It is true. Our world is filled with any number of pursuits that have the potential to lead us down paths of fulfillment or distraction, wholeness or fragmentation, all depending on the values which we choose to anchor ourselves in the purpose we seek to achieve. I pray we'll be among those who are strong enough to see that the only end-all, be-all, the only whole for which we should strive is that of shalom, the shalom that our tradition envisions will come when each of us fulfills our unique and divine purpose in making God's image manifest in each and every part of this world we touch. Shabbat shalom.